This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Airline workers begin their strike at South Africa's state-owned carrier. A meeting between Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan on the Grand Renaissance Dam resumes in Addis Ababa today. And the US seeks a global coalition meeting on the threat of ISIL in West Africa and the Sahel. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, Egypt and Saudi Arabia sign a $20 billion joint investment deal. And in sports, Egypt maintains a perfect record with a win over Cameroon at the Under-23 Africa Cup of Nations. Well, we start today's program in South Africa, where the national carrier has cancelled flights scheduled for today and Saturday. Only flights from international destinations are returning to the country. Now, this comes as airline staff begin their strike on Friday. They've gathered at OR Tambo International in Johannesburg, as well as Cape Town International Airport. The stalemate emanates from a bitter wage dispute compounded by a retrenchment strategy which could see almost 1,000 employees lose their jobs within the first few months of 2020. The workers' union claims the restructuring process should not cost people their jobs. SAA has been suffering dire financial losses and has pleaded with government for an urgent $135 million bailout.
So we're not just saying give us 8%. We've done our homework. We cannot have the board that we have now. They don't have a plan. Quite frankly, we believe they don't know what they're doing. We need a board whose interest is to turn around South African Airways. And we cannot continue in this way. We need people that are capable of actually turning this airline around. We've got 11,000 employees live that we're holding at SAA. So this is more than just an 8% fight. It's also fighting for the survival of this company. The only way we know how to do it as Labour is to stand out here and demonstrate, strike.
Well, let's bring you the very latest now on the strike action taking place in South Africa. We're joined by CGTN's Angela Coppola live with us in Johannesburg. Angela, of course, staff have officially downed their tools. Just give us an update on the strike action as well as the state of negotiations so far.
Lindy, at the moment, the strike, as you know, started on time at around 4 o'clock this morning when there was that crew change and the shift change. That happened smoothly. The people were out here in their numbers. This is after those talks broke down on Thursday between management and the two unions involved. And in fact, they were demanding 8% and management were offering that 5.6%. On Friday, the unions told me that they've actually agreed to meet with management at CCMA, which is the Conciliation and Commission, which kind of will seek to find a mediation or mediated solution for the two parties. But the unions are telling me both that they're not very confident that a solution will be found because management doesn't want to budge on that 8% or that 5.6% that they're offering. So there's no common ground to be found just yet. So we'll have to see what happens after that meeting a little later, Lindy.
And it's certainly quite worrying that there's no common ground as yet. As we know, SAA flies about 7 million passengers across the world. What is the likely impact of this strike?
Well, as we know now, all those flights have been grounded. In fact, the day after the unions announced the mother of all strikes, as they called it, SAA's management came out and announced that they're actually going to ground all of SAA's flights for 2 days. And that's at a cost of around $3.5 million per day. So that's 2 days worth and $7 million later, which the unions are saying will probably cover the costs or the increases that the unions are demanding at that 8% for the entire year for all of the staff within SAA. So the issue here really is that there's no common ground that's been reached. The damage, of course, to the airline has been done, and analysts are now wondering because the airline did say that it's only SAA that's affected. The analysts are now wondering whether the alliance partners for SAA, the likes of Emirates and Ethiopian, are going to continue picking up and managing that risk while SAA goes through its current ongoing issues. So there's a bit of an issue there. We have to see how the partners or the alliance partners react to these ongoing issues and the strike that's currently underway. Lindy?
And when you talk about these ongoing issues, we know, Angelo, that SAA has been plagued with problems for many years. The unions are now saying that it's their members that are being asked to pay the price for years of corruption and looting by management and the board. Why has no one been held accountable so far?
Well, Lindy, at the moment, you're probably aware that OUTA, the organisation undoing tax abuse, has actually taken the ex-chair of SAA, Dudu Nyeni, to court to have her declared a delinquent director because of her non-action or lack of action at SAA as board chair. She claimed, of course, famously that she couldn't attend the court case because, wait for it, she didn't have the money to pay for her flights from Durban to Johannesburg, so the case was postponed. But of course, she is going to also appear at the Zondo Commission. She's given evidence once. They are going to call her back. And of course, she's going to have to be cross-examined by people she's implicated in her first and second rounds. So that's also happening. Meanwhile, the unions that tell us there are also 7 odd forensic investigation reports that are on the table or have already been sent over to SAA management and the board for action, and unions are claiming that no action or no definitive action was taken against those board members implicated in wrongdoing, mismanagement or perhaps corrupt activities. So obviously those workers are a little irked that they're being made to suffer in terms of retrenchments of those 944 people. Lindy?
Yeah, that is, of course, a major cause of concern. Thank you so much, Angela Coppola, joining us there live from Johannesburg. SAA workers there on strike, and that strike action set to continue into Saturday. Now, Kenya and Somalia have agreed to normalize bilateral relations, starting with the restoration of the issuance of travel visas on arrival for citizens of both nations. The restoration of the visa on arrival arrangement is aimed at enhancing the free movement of people and commerce between Kenya and Somalia. The agreement was reached during a meeting between Presidents Uhuru Kenyatta and Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed of the Federal Republic of Somalia on the sidelines of the just concluded Nairobi ICPD 25 summit. During the meeting, the two leaders agreed to explore avenues of strengthening bilateral and diplomatic ties. The meeting comes amid tension over a maritime border dispute between the two nations. In September, both leaders met at the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, but that meeting did not yield results.
We have agreed with my brother that there is need for us to ensure we bring normality to our relationship, we bring sensibility back to our relationship. And as brothers who may disagree from time to time, but families always find a way of resolving their problems in a peaceful manner. So we agreed that from now onwards, we must do everything we can, especially as leaders, to ensure that our people live peacefully, they live happily, and we are able to work together because ultimately we are one people.
We have a lot of things in common, for sure. We have a lot of things in common. Our people to people, government to government, business to business. Of course, we have a trade, okay, that's really mutually benefit for both countries. And people basically take it our differences rather than our common interest. And that's why I have to assure that the ICJ issue will not affect our bilateral relationship.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The United States is calling for a meeting of the Global Coalition Against ISIL in early 2020 that will focus on threats in West Africa and the Sahel. thousands of people have been killed and millions more displaced by violence in the Sahel and West Africa over the past decade. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the two regions are where global efforts should be concentrated. Well, the Sahel region, of course, faces many complex and interconnected challenges. Here's a glimpse into the region.
The Western Sahel region of Africa lies between the Sahara Desert to the north and the Sudanian savanna to the south. It stretches from Senegal through parts of Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Nigeria, Chad, and Sudan to Eritrea. The region's population is expected to more than double by 2050. In recent years, it has been in the global spotlight due to humanitarian disasters, the product of both local and global dynamics. In Mali, Islamist extremism remains a threat. Fighters continue to launch series of attacks, the most recent an attack at a military outpost that killed dozens of soldiers. The situation is similar in Burkina Faso. Jihadist attacks have increased since 2015, forcing thousands to flee. In Mauritania, drug and people smugglers are slowly turning the place into a migrant route. In Nigeria, ISWAP is a splinter faction of Boko Haram that swore allegiance in 2016 to ISIL has repeatedly attacked military bases in the north of the country. Chad and Niger are also facing considerably security threats from jihadists. Chamrono, CGTN.
Well, let's discuss this a little further now. We're joined from our Lagos studio in Nigeria by Dixon Osajie, a security expert. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Dixon. Now, we know that the Sahel region in West Africa has seen insecurity for over the past decade, especially increasing since 2015. Why do you think it is that the U.S. wants this meeting with the Global Coalition Against ISIL at this particular point? Why now?
Well, thank you, Lindy. Nice being here. I think the call for United States to concentrate on Africa is a welcome development. And you can understand that I have raised this observation many times that the world needs to pay attention in Africa because the growing spate of insecurity in Africa is really on the high side. Now, looking at it from 2015 till now, it's not too late because if you want to ask why are the United States trying to call for this, I think it's a welcome development. And Mike Pompeo discussing with Stoltenberg, I think it's a good one. There's what we call hierarchy of control. In hierarchy of control, you take your risk as it comes, and you have to prioritize your risk. So I think the American government, what they did was to have prioritized the risk and believe that the time to face concentrate on Africa is really now. After taking off al-Baghdadi, destabilize Syria, destabilize Iraq, they believe that these guys are moving into Africa because of the vulnerability of our security agency and lack of leadership control. The development is a welcome development, and I think that the world should concentrate on Africa very well. And in exception of that, Linda, let us look at the youth at this point in time, because if the Americans are coming to concentrate on Africa, they need to look at the youth, because most of our youth are suffering from parental absenteeism. And if most of these guys suffer from parental absenteeism, lack of job, psychological murder, the efforts of the American perhaps might be in vain. But if they are coming in from the operational methodology, I think they should also apply the psychological methodology of these operations, go into the dark network, look at the reasons why these guys are interested in concentrating.
Right, Dixon, so of course it's not just the United States that is showing an interest in security affairs in West Africa and the Sahel. We've seen the French get involved in this region, the Germans as well. Do you think there is coordination between these global powers that are trying to fight ISIL in Africa?
For me, I don't think there's a unity of purpose between the global powers. Thanks to Americans, thanks to some other world powers who really take terrorism as a crime against the world. If this world must move forward, the United Nations must ensure that every country are held accountable in the result of crime. And first of all, what the global powers should be concentrating on is they are going to look into the triangle of crime. I'm a criminologist, and I stand to tell you that for a crime to take place, there will be the desirability of that crime. There's also going to be an opportunity and also the target. So what I want the world to concentrate is the desirability. Why are these guys ready to take human lives? Why are they ready to destroy? Why are they carrying out this mayhem? What are the factors? What are the ideological factors? Because they need to look into the ideological factors as well. And I told you many times again that ideology could take till eternity. Ideology is not a war you can eliminate between a day or a month or a year. Ideology is a systematical warfare that needs to be addressed in a systematical manner so that our country and our world will be a safer place.
But do you think this is the strength of the United States' strategy, focusing on the ideology? I mean, we've seen the US try to combat ISIL in places like Syria, in places like Iraq. How do you think then, bearing that experience in mind, how do you think this situation is likely to turn out?
Okay, well, the situation might not likely give them results. The reason why I said so was that, like for example, here in Nigeria, some few months ago, some correctional facilities or correctional centers, the Nigerian security agencies went into those correctional centers due to intelligence gathering and discovered that hundreds of thousands of people were kept in those correctional centers for reasons best known to the owners of those correctional centers. These are the places whereby these guys are being brainwashed, these guys are being ill-informed, these guys are being nurtured in a negative manner to rise against the state. So for me, I think if the United States of America and the world powers are going to concentrate on Africa, it's going to be a very good development. But first of all, they need to ensure that they look at the majority of the youth in this African region. Our youth are suffering every day. A lot of jobless youth are moving around the street. And if the opportunity comes from the enemy to give them a job, they will fly at that opportunity because most of these enemies, what they do, they persuade these guys with good amounts of money, brainwash them psychologically and let them know that their action is justifiable by their own gods. But what I'm going to suggest to the American government is that they should ensure that the African government are really monitored. Put an eyes on the African government, call them to order. Let us look at leadership. Let us look at leadership role in African region. Let us look at it as rulership, because what we are suffering here in African region is that we have rulers. We don't have leaders. Leaders are supposed to lead by example, respect court orders, respect decisions from security agencies, and also apply a non-kinetic approach in containing this warfare. When we apply non-kinetic approach and come in from the ideological point of view, the operational methodology will be applied by security forces. Then terrorism will be history in Africa and in the world.
That is what we all hope for indeed. Thank you so much, Dixon Osajio, for that insightful analysis, joining us there live from Lagos. You are watching Africa Live. Time now for a short break. Coming up, widespread exam cheating persists in African schools despite strict measures to curb the vice. And we see how Egypt is coping with an increasing rate of diabetes.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Now,
authorities in Somalia have discovered leaked exam material. The The online leaks have prompted education officials to suspend exams and announce internet restrictions on social media sites. From Mogadishu, here's CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello.
Education officials in Somalia suspended national secondary school examinations earlier this year after it was discovered that papers were being sold and shared on various social media platforms. The Ministry of Education later announced that it will block social media access to curb cheating and to preserve the integrity of the exams.
The Ministry of Education has requested the Supreme Court to grant it authority that restricts use of social media during the examination period. The court has granted us full authority to limit its use. In the future, we will limit the use of social media in the event of online leaks.
It's the first time officials in the capital have threatened to impose restrictions on social media in a nation with a high population of active social media users. Rights groups have criticized Somali authorities over the move, accusing it of failing in its duty to secure the content of exam papers. Analysts argue that a new law is needed to guide social media restrictions, especially in matters of national interest.
There needs to be laws and guidelines to curb cheating. This is most important, especially during examinations. If exams leaked, they will have an influence in the outcome and the student's future. Internet restriction is not good, but must be enforced in some circumstances.
More than 30,000 students were affected during the recent cases of exams cheating. The cancellation also saw massive demonstrations across the city. Authorities in Somalia have also threatened to take legal action against individuals found engaging in examination malpractices. Social media sites like Facebook and WhatsApp have been cited as the two main platforms used during recent leaks in the country. Abdulaziz Bello, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Well, let's bring you more on this now. I'm joined here in our Nairobi studio by Otoa Sifuna, who represents the education sector here in Kenya. Thank you so much for your time. Now, we were just looking at that case in Somalia where there's been cheating reported, exams have been suspended, social media has been restricted. But of course, this is not unique to Somalia. Kenya has seen exam cheating happening here too. Why do you think it is that this is big, or in your view, is it widespread? Is it prevalent at the moment?
Yeah, Lindy, thank you for having me. It's quite unfortunate that, and it's becoming a global, really spreading like bushfire into the African continent. Mm-hmm. We as people who have been in the education sector for long, we are getting worried that there is a problem. We have to admit and take responsibility that there's a problem in the education sector. The very essence of examination is to test on the learner's ability. And I think the problem emanates from the fact that we have made our education system so much pegged on the exam. We are an exam-oriented system, and if a student has not produced an A grade, he or she is deemed to be a failure. And so when we put a lot of emphasis on exam system, we are not looking at the process upon which that particular student is going through the education sector, then we are missing out the point. You have seen the manner in which students, and even so unfortunate, some of the education stakeholders like teachers are going just to ensure that the exam is leaked so that they have grades. Here in Kenya, you remember the question of ranking, where we rank the top school and even the last school is also ranked. So people are going all manner hooks and crooks to make sure that their institutions are at the top. At the end of the day, the learner is missing out on the progressive values of education. When a child manages to steal the exam at primary level, goes to the high school and steals the exam, goes to the university and steals the exam, what is going to stop that student or that fella when he graduates and becomes an office bearer from looting from the public coffers? So we need to nip the bud from the very basic level.
Beginning,
and I want to congratulate the Kenyan government. We might say, yes, it's rampant. It has been much, much terrible.
But this is what's quite interesting about it, though. It's not just the students that are involved. As you mentioned, teachers are invested in seeing their own classes do well or their own schools do well. So just how complex or how creative are these masterminds of these cheating cheating schemes? Because, I mean, you know, there's even examiners involved in times, and despite arrests, it continues.
Yes, and even the school principals. I have said that it's because we are actually a competitive exam system, that when my school is at the top, I say hooray. There has been so many forms of, it has metamorphosized into very complicated ways of cheating. Some are even impersonating. They are calling in graduates. Some are even calling teachers to put on school uniform and sit for the test. It is becoming chaotic, Lindy. And until governments realize that this is a time bomb, and they do something in terms of a radical surgery to ensure that we sanitize our education system, we are giving a raw deal to the young ones.
So what are the strategies that work then? I mean, you say that we're prioritizing exams too much. Would it be better to assess students throughout the year rather than have the focus just be on exams?
Exactly. There is two types of evaluation. The summative evaluation that happens at the tail end of the year, of the cycle of the education. And there is the formative education that is kept on consistent. If you look at the Kenyan scenario, there is what we call competence-based education curriculum that is coming on board. That is going to leverage on formative evaluation, that the child is progressively evaluated, so that we do not put pressure at the tail end of either grade 8 or at the Form 4 grade 12 exam to actually test once. That is what we are making the exam to be so much a mental process. Some students are even committing suicide when they fail this exam. So until we also realize that when you go to school, you must get the values of education. You must get the skills and the experiences of education. You must not be charged by a grade on a particular piece of paper. And some of us who are teachers, we believe that it is right about that time where we have to delink exams from schools. Indeed. So that these learners can enjoy a free learning process. Let them learn freely. Exams are, according to me, they bombard that particular student into a corner. Indeed. Such that there's, because you cannot rationalize so many years of learning, and then you are tested on 12 questions. Exactly. Supposing you are sick, supposing you lost your parent during the exam, and you are psychologically stressed up.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. That was a very informative perspective on exams in Kenya. Thank you very much to our education expert, Otua Sifuna, here in studio with us in Nairobi. Let's move on to news now from Egypt, where the country is among other nations with the highest prevalence of diabetes. More than 8 million adults are described as diabetic. That's about 16% of adults and twice the global average. Moreover, about 14% of the entire population are estimated to be pre-diabetic. CGTN's Adil Al-Mahri looks into how the country is dealing with these staggering rates.
26-year-old Mahmoud Saeed is waiting for his cup of tea. He likes it with 4 spoons of sugar. Recently, though, his doctor advised to bring it down to just half a teaspoon. 2 weeks ago, Mahmoud was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
I found out I'm diabetic by chance. I urinated a lot. I got thirsty a lot. I wanted to eat fruits, not regular food. I did some blood analysis. My father called me and broke the news to me. I was shocked. I've never complained before. Never expected I'd get it. I didn't even know anything about the disease.
Experts say millions like Mahmoud are walking around unaware that they too could be on the verge of diabetes. 60% of Egyptians are overweight. More than 30% are physically inactive, and around the same figure are obese. The WHO says 16.2% of Egyptians are either diabetic or with related risk factors. It's double the global average.
Diabetes is very dangerous because most families know very little about it. Early diagnosis is essential. It helps us to intervene, but unfortunately, in rural areas where illiteracy spreads, there is no culture of medical checkups. They don't even have money if they wanted to. That drove our NGO to visit the poorest villages and perform free checkups for school students.
Egypt has launched a massive medical campaign to diagnose non-communicable disease. According to the government, tens of millions of adults and students have been checked for diabetes. But even when diagnosed, experts say the whole society's culture needs to change.
Usually parents are very keen to follow the rules and diet when their child is first diagnosed. In time they lose interest, then they don't measure blood glucose for their kids. Sports are very important. Parents would ask us to excuse him from physical education because he's diabetic. We have a culture issue that needs to be changed.
In Egypt, however, sophisticated diabetes technologies are too expensive for most people.
Technologies like insulin pumps are not spread in Egypt because it's expensive. We try to subsidize it in public hospitals, but it's still expensive. There is a device that sticks to the body and always gives blood glucose readings instead of puncturing skin. It's also expensive. There are stem cells therapy, but they're not practical financially to most Egyptians.
Still concerned with his newly discovered diagnosis, Mahmoud wonders if there are new approaches to treat his diabetes out there in the world. He researches about this topic almost every day.
I feel like I'm on my own in the search of a cure. Whenever I talk to doctors about a different approach abroad, they tell me no. Your only option is this kind of insulin injection. I want an alternative other than the 4 injections I'm taking daily. Doctors are not up to date. I really hate going to clinics here. The whole process is tiring.
For children younger than 18 years, the government funds their diabetes treatment almost entirely. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
The stalled meeting between Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan on the issue of the Grand Renaissance Dam is set to resume in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. The 3 sides will be represented by experts in the technical talks. CGTN's Gurum Chala is following up on that story and filed this report.
The resumption of the talks between Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan come after the 3 sides represented by respective ministers met in Washington, D.C. last month. Here in Addis Ababa, and as per the agreement in DC, the 3 countries' experts will have negotiations at a technical level. That includes the contentious water filling timetable of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The just started Addis Ababa meeting is one of the 4 similar upcoming technical meetings between the water ministers of Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan. The U.S. government and the World Bank representatives are similarly in attendance of these meetings with an observer role. On the other hand, the 3 countries have agreed to put to rest the unresolved dam filling timetable and other technical issues by 15th of January 2020. And all meetings will be held as per the 2015 Declarations of Principles. Grumtala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's coming up in your business news. Egypt and Saudi Arabia sign a $20 billion joint investment program. And Tunisia ramps up efforts to modernize its main port to boost export and maritime activity.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
In your business news, the UAE and Egypt have launched a massive $20 billion joint investment program to develop economic and social projects. The deal comes as Cairo seeks assistance with boosting its sagging economy. The Abu Dhabi Crown Prince made the announcement while receiving Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on a visit to the Emirati capital. The 2 leaders discussed ways of strengthening relations and enhancing coordination. Security in the region remains a challenge on the back of increased regional tensions following a string of attacks on oil tankers and ships in the Gulf that have been blamed on Iran. Tehran, on the other hand, denies the accusations. Now, finding the right business partners is a challenge in any endeavor, and for banks looking to invest in rail infrastructure, it's especially difficult. This is what's led to a memorandum of understanding between the Africa Export-Import Bank and the Telo DB. The agreement was signed at the Africa Investment Forum recently held in South Africa. Angela Coppola has the details.
The key problem facing railway network developers is finding solid research on the state of the continent's rail infrastructure and other logistics. Research that identifies a gap and provides a range of solutions.
It's not just to build a railway, it's not just to get the rolling stock, but we need to operate them efficiently. Again, this partnership provides a solution for operating and managing complex issues that surround rail.
Partnership with Afrexim Bank allows us to mobilize capital not only from the continent of Africa, from development finance institutions and commercial banks on the continent, but to mobilize capital much more broadly.
The MOU goes further than research and rolling stock, though. It's about being multimodal. But there are practical considerations when it comes to rail.
I think on the continent we have to start thinking about standardizing gauge. But the reality today is let's get goods moving from A to B.
We believe that it will help us drive our effort in developing and expanding the logistics infrastructure that will help us expand intra-African trade in the years ahead.
The expectation is that the African Continental Free Trade Area will actually increase intra-African trade significantly, some say by as much as 15%. But for that to become a reality, the continent's transportation systems need to be integrated and, more importantly, seamless. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Sandton, South Africa.
To Tunisia now, the country is launching a modernization plan for its main port in a bid to boost export and maritime activity. The upgrade will help track containers instantaneously and optimize port management.
The main component of the modernization project of the port of Radiz will be accompanied by two other components, namely the establishment of a smart gate which will help organize and plan the flow of goods at the terminal's entry and exit gates, and to acquire 6 new cranes to increase the storage capacity of the port.
This project is a real revolution for this port. Its objective is to raise this port to international standards in terms of transport and logistics, step up its efficiency, and make life easier for economic operators and boost Tunisian export, which 98% depend on maritime transport.
The project also aims to ensure the instantaneous tracking of containers in the port and optimize the movement of gear, avoiding unproductive travel, to increase the performance of the embarkation and disembarkation operations, reduce the cost of storage, and to better manage the flows and the port's entrance and exit.
In comparison to 2010, the productivity of the port of Radiz has decreased. The quantities of goods were reduced and transferred to other ports because of the lack of equipment. The ongoing modernization project is necessary to resume a normal activity.
The modernization initiative is financed by means of around $27 million by the World Bank.
The first 3 essential components of the project will be followed by 2 other components. It involves the development of digitized customs management systems and the modernization of container removal system.
Authorities say that an electronic payment system will be made available to economic operators in the next 2 weeks. According to the Minister of Transport, the modernization project is aimed to restore the dynamic of the port, to step up its efficiency, and to increase the container storage capacity. The success of the project requires the involvement of all stakeholders. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
This year's BRICS Summit has wrapped up in Brasilia. The 2-day event concluded with a declaration on the importance of improving cooperation among all 5 member states. CGTN's Yu Yang has the details.
A defense of multilateralism. That's a strong signal sent by the world's major emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. BRICS leaders have inked a joint statement, the Brasilia Declaration. The document lays stress on overcoming challenges facing multilateralism, upholding the central role of the UN in international affairs, while building a community of shared future for mankind. It says there is an urgent need to reform multilateral organizations, including the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and the International Monetary Fund. BRICS nations reiterated the importance of the rules-based, open, free, and inclusive international trade. The bloc speaks highly of new development banks' efforts in infrastructure and financing. It also says it will promote sustainable development in economic, social, and environmental dimensions. Chinese President Xi Jinping was particularly critical of the global rise of protectionism, in part reflected in the China-US trade conflict.
But there are also causes for concern. For example, increased protectionism and unilateralism, creating a governance, development, and reliability deficit.
The Brasilia Declaration also says BRICS members will stick to the Paris Agreement under the principles of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The document reiterates the bloc condemns terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, and says that BRICS will also fight against internet and communication crimes. The BRICS summit is held annually, alternating among its 5 members. The bloc accounts for over 40% of the global population, and in 2018, BRICS countries accounted for 33% of global GDP. Despite navigating around different politics and culture, the group hopes to see the rewards through cooperation. Youyang, CGTN.
The China-based New Development Bank has approved more than $8 billion in loans for projects in its 5 partner countries since its establishment in 2015. Brazil's allotment tops $620 million, much of it devoted to renewable energy projects. Our correspondent in Brazil, Paulo Cabral, visited a wind energy park in the country's northeast that did benefit from those resources.
In this part of Brazil's impoverished northeast, known as the Sertão, the backwoods, the land is dry and rain scarce for most of the year. Not many crops thrive in these conditions. But manioc, also known as cassava, will grow here, and most small farmers cultivate it to make starch and flour, a staple food ingredient for many people in this region. There is also lots of strong and constant wind, and such wind has become a source of energy for the country and income for hundreds of families here who are paid rental for the use of their land for wind turbines. Some landowners here with larger areas have up to a dozen turbines set up in their properties, and that does give them some good rental money. But the biggest impact we see here is in the lives of smaller farmers, usually poorer ones, who have space for 1 or 2 turbines. For them, the extra money can make a big difference. José Valdecir da Silva has 2 of these turbines set up on his land. The company that owns them pays the equivalent of about $400 per month for each one.
Some of the people decided to lease their lands and others didn't. Those who didn't now regret it because they're not getting the money. For us who did it, it's good. It's not a whole lot of money, but it's very helpful now because manioc prices are very low.
The Ventos do Araripe Wind Energy Park was built by Brazilian company Casa dos Ventos and completed in 2017. It was partially funded with resources from the China-based New Development Bank, the NDB, also called the BRICS Bank. That NDB funding here in Ventos do Araripe came to about $67 million out of a total of $621 million allocated by the bank for projects across Brazil between 2016 and 2018.
Important to have the support of NDB, not only as a financial standpoint to enhance our capability for the project, but also they bring a lot of experience on structuring these kinds of projects.
The mayor of the 14,000 inhabitants town of Simões, where most of the park's turbines are located, says the 300 towers set up in their territory make a big difference for the city.
The wind park has certainly helped the farmers around here because they receive an income from the use of their land. And this income also helps to boost the local economy and benefits all citizens.
There are many opportunities for investment in infrastructure in Brazil, including those with great potential to improve people's lives. Brazilians will no doubt continue to look to international institutions like the New Development Bank to help make these projects a reality. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, Simões, in Brazil.
Let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Despite losing popularity among the youth, Tunisia's traditional board game Karbaga is still a hit with the older generation.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's go to Tunisia now, where the legacy of an age-old game is at risk of fading away. Karbaga is a two-player abstract strategy game played on an Alkirki board. It's popular among the old and retired men of the country, but the younger generation seems to have abandoned it. Adnan Chouachi has more.
The player who captures all his opponent's pieces is the winner. This is the main rule that old men have always respected. Some people play while others drink tea and observe the flow of the small and colored pieces on the board.
I love this traditional game. It reminds me of my ancestors. I play for fun and to improve my memory. It's cheap, simple and healthy.
These friends have been playing Karbaga for the past 60 years. They learned this traditional game from their parents. Everything has changed in the city, but the board and the rules are the same. Some children watch the game while others ignore it because it has become too simple to attract their attention.
My grandchildren are not interested in the game. Only 2 out of 10 play it. I feel young when I play.
The new generation is no longer tempted to play traditional games. They prefer video games and social networks.
I spend hours on my computer playing video games, and honestly, I just don't like traditional games. There's no real challenge, so I prefer adrenaline games.
Karbaga is a Tunisian and North African game. It is widely spread in neighboring Algeria and Libya, especially in villages and inner regions. Some international startups have developed modern and digital versions of Karbaga. The games can be downloaded on mobile phones and played anywhere. However, the older generations prefer the traditional games. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Coming up in your sports news, up next. Egypt maintain a perfect record with the win over Cameroon at the Under-23 Africa Cup of Nations.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours?